there's these obvious spiritual disciplines that we need to do, like reading our Bible, spending time in prayer, and surrounding ourselves with people that point us back to Jesus. These are good things because they actually help us to be in relationship with the Father and get to know him deeper. We need to do these things, but not to appease God or your parents or youth ministers, but because they actually fill us up and help us know more of who God is and who he's created us to be. I'm going to say that one more time. We need to do these things, not to appease, but because they fill us up and help us know more of who God is. But if we only do these things, then how could we ever hope to bring about change from within the walls of our comfort zone? It's only when we choose to show up to what God's calling us to do that we get to be part of the kingdom change. So if you guys have your Bible with you or your phone or whatever, go ahead and flip open to Exodus 3 and 4. That's where we're going to be hanging out for the next few minutes. But first, I want to catch you guys up to speed and give you a very abbreviated version of Moses' early years in life. So we have the Pharaoh of Egypt, right? He's ordered to have all of the boys in Egypt murdered. But as we know, Moses' mom rebels, and she sends Moses down the river, where he's found by Pharaoh's daughter. So he actually grows up in the royal family. But later on, he has to flee to Midian because he's murdered an Egyptian for treating some Hebrew slaves too harshly. There, things are going pretty well. He finds a wife, he's got a job, and he's now tending the sheep of his father-in-law. And so by the time we get to our point in the story, Moses is an old man, and he's been living this way for a long time. Until one day, when he's just doing his thing, as shepherds do, and everything changes. Starting in chapter 3, verse 2, it says, "There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. 'This is amazing,' Moses said to himself. 'Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see it.' When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God calls to him from the middle of the bush. 'Moses, Moses!' 'Here I am,' Moses replied. 'Do not come any closer,' the Lord warned. 'Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob.' When Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. And so God goes on to tell Moses that he has seen the suffering of his people, and he has this rescue mission all planned out. He fills Moses in on this plan. Can you imagine? But the kicker, as we know, he's called Moses to be the one to rescue those people. 'So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt.' Now, how would you respond to this? If I were in Moses' shoes, I'm either A, moonwalking away because, hello, talking burning bush, or I'm crying because, again, talking burning bush, or nervously laughing because I'm the kind of person that has a nervous laugh. But on a much smaller scale, who of you have panicked and made up some sort of excuse why you just shouldn't have to do something? Okay, good. At least I'm not alone. What were you trying to avoid? For me, when I met my husband, Brad, it felt like it couldn't have come. Brad just gave himself a shout out, so that's great. It felt like it couldn't have come at a worse time. So I made up every excuse possible why we just weren't going to work out. First of all, I was heartbroken from the past relationship I was in, and that hadn't ended that long ago. So what would people say of me? Would this affect my job? And honestly, I felt too broken to even function in a healthy relationship. Clearly, I was a hot mess. So when Brad got to know me, he was going to run far away anyways. Ultimately, I was faced with this choice, the same one as Moses, and actually, whether you know it or not, you're faced with this choice every single day. Will you choose to shrink back or to show up? Which will it be? Will you shrink back or show up? See, Moses is faced with this initial invitation. So come. It's these two tiny words that have so much weight in them. And it's here that we enter into a series that I affectionately call Panicky Moses Statements. So first up in our Panicky Moses Statements, he responds, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Jesus?" Wow. Who am I? Who am I that I should go? For you, this might sound a little bit more like, who am I to be brave enough, strong enough, cool enough, smart enough, Christian enough? Just fill in the blank. Next up, panicky Moses says, what shall I say to them? Suppose they don't believe me or listen to me. I think this one maybe translate a little bit for us like, God, you want me to do what? How will they know you sent me? What if they think I'm crazy? Generally, as humans, we don't like to be seen as crazy. Maybe you're different, that's fine, to each his own. But most of us avoid putting off crazy vibes. This possibility of someone thinking that we're crazy is reason enough for most of us to avoid doing it altogether. So maybe it's just going up to someone and encouraging them with something that God's laid on your heart. Or maybe it's standing up for that kid that's getting bullied. Or maybe it's sitting with that kid at lunch who's a little bit of weird and a whole lot of smelly. Whatever it is that kind of goes against the norm, we hate looking weird, even if we know that Jesus is calling us to it. This next excuse, it takes it to a whole new level. Oh, my Lord, I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor even now that you've spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. God wants Moses to get up in front of the leader of the country along with massive groups of his own people to persuade them. Most scholars agree that it's likely a speech impediment that Moses is referring to. And so Moses probably thought it was legitimately impossible for him to be a persuasive leader when he has this speech impediment that keeps him from communicating well. Seems fair, right? But God, of course, persists. And Moses throws out one last Hail Mary. Oh, my Lord, please send someone else. Moses is so desperate. He's just given up on giving his panicky Moses excuses and instead has resorted to straight up begging God to send someone else. How many of you have responded to something with, who am I? Or what would I say? What effect would it have? Or maybe for you, it's, I'm broken, please send someone else. The good news is, you're not alone in feeling these temptations to shrink back away from the job because you're doubting that you can do it. See, there's this girl that I look up to. She inspires me so much. She's smart, adventurous, and sassy, and she too was called to this huge task. But see, her partner, he had started to doubt himself. And he projected that same doubt onto her. He told her, you are not the one for the job. And she started to believe that. She really did start to think that I am not the one for the job. So she begged, please choose someone else because she wanted to shrink back from what she was called to do. So, I don't know about you, but Moana, majorly underappreciated Disney movie. Am I right? I feel like she came after the Frozen thing. It was a few years after, but that Frozen deal lasted a long time, and so our poor Moana, she got left to the side. But I really do think it's an amazing movie for a lot of reasons. But one of them is that it really depicts this idea so beautifully. And the scene before it, it shows her begging, please send someone else. I'm not the one for the job. But she chooses to show up to the job set before her. And if you've seen the movie, if not, go watch it right after this because you need it in your life. But after this part, she goes and this incredible change happens simply because she chose to show up to the job. Moses, he wanted to shrink back into his quiet and easy life. Was there anything wrong with that life? Not at all. But God was actually inviting him into something better. And I think you and I, we have similar opportunities all the time, both big and small ones, where we can choose to either shrink back into our everyday routines, just refusing to acknowledge these invitations to change that God's inviting us into, or we can choose to simply show up. And when I say show up, I really just mean show up to whatever it is you're facing that day. Show up and do the hard thing. The greatest agents of change, they ran headfirst against the tides of society. It was not easy, but they did the hard thing because they knew it was the right thing. Show up and do the scary thing. Changemakers aren't fearless. They just refuse to let fear dictate their decisions. They show up scared and trust that change will occur. Show up in your communities. Change can't happen in isolation. So go, participate in your schools, your clubs, your teams, your youth groups. These are the spaces where change happens. Show up again and again, even after you mess up. Change makers aren't perfect. They're far from it. But it's in their persistence that they start to create these little ripples of change that eventually turn into much larger movements. And show up as who God made you. I get it. As a teenager, it's so easy to take on these chameleon habits, just blending in with every crowd that you're a part of. But God is calling you to show up as He's created you to be, not as what you perceive others want you to be. And finally, invite others to show up. You see, change makers, they see the very best in those around them, especially the voiceless, the outcasts, and the forgotten. They remind them that they too have a voice and gifts, and they absolutely matter. Every day, we're faced with the choice where we can shrink back or to show up, just like Moana and Moses. But maybe right now, you're feeling a whole lot like Moses and thinking of a million excuses why you are not the one for the job. To Moses asking, "Who am I?" God replies with, "I will be with you." And God promises that exact same promise to you guys. God didn't make this major request of Moses and then holler, "Good luck," as we watched him venture off. God, His presence brings confidence, power, and peace. Honestly, it didn't matter who Moses was, and it doesn't really matter who I am or who you are, because we have the God of the universe walking alongside us, bringing the same confidence, power, and peace that He brought Moses in the face of his fears. To Moses asking, "What shall I say to them?" God tells him, "I am who I am. Thus you shall say to the Israelites, 'I am has sent me to you.'" I think that this ambiguous name that God gives, it one shows how vastly large God is, entirely uncontainable. But I think maybe there's even more to it. So in ancient Egypt, just one Egypt. In ancient Egypt, they worshipped a bunch of gods. And there was this idea that you could know a God's secret name. And so for a person to know a God's secret name was actually them gaining some power over that person. Now, up until this point in the Bible, people have asked for God's name. No one's received an answer yet. Not Abraham, not Isaac, not Jacob, but Moses. Moses asks, and he receives an answer. "I am who I am." And God letting Moses in on His name, He's actually empowering him with His very own power. This is huge. God's a relational God. And so not only does He answer Moses and give him a name, but He goes above and beyond and passes on His very own power to him for the sake of relationship. You and I, we have the same gift of empowerment through our own relationship with the I Am. To Moses saying, "They won't believe me," God gave him 3 miracles to prove his calling by God. And yes, these were to prove to the people that he was called, but also I think they were just as much a reminder to Moses, because clearly Moses needed it. He needed a little extra boost there, right? That wasn't intentional, but that was perfect. So I think there's this weird thing that happens when we partner with God in life and we're obedient to what He's calling us to. See, we tend to learn just as much, if not more, than those we're ministering to. And so whatever it is that you need to keep showing up to, God's got you. He's going to provide you with the tools both for the sake of others and for yourself. I promise you, you're in it with Him. And to Moses saying, "I'm not a good enough speaker," God speaks against this too. He says, "Who gives speech to mortals? Who makes them mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you are to speak." What lies are you believing about yourself right now? Whatever it is, there's a good chance that you're not blank enough. God thinks otherwise. If we believe that God has created us each so intentionally and purposefully, and I genuinely believe that, then God's fully aware of our every shortcoming, and He's calling us anyway. God fills in the gaps where we fall short. See, when I didn't become a Christ follower until I was in college, but I was all in. to the point that I decided I was going to be a camp counselor for a bunch of Nutso elementary school kids. So during my interview, the interviewer asked me a really simple question. He said, "What is the gospel?" My stomach dropped. I answered honestly, because what else could I do? I just said, "I don't know." I was so new to this following Jesus thing, so I was already feeling a little inadequate, and then this just sealed the deal. Who was I to apply for a job in ministry? I thought for sure that guy was just going to laugh in my face. But instead, he gently affirmed that they'd teach me. I got hired on that summer, and ultimately, it's why I changed my career paths before my senior year of college and went into ministry. God met me in that summer in so many ways. He gave me the words to say. He met me in my shortcomings, and he has continued to do that every single day. God's not asking you to show up once you know enough, pray enough, read enough, or any other enough. He's inviting you to show up right now as you are, because I promise you, he's got the rest. And even when stubborn Moses still begged that God send someone else, he met Moses where he was. He sent his brother Aaron to speak instead. Now, little did Moses know that later on he'd be the one speaking to the crowds, no longer the middleman between Aaron and God. God knew, but in the meantime, he met Moses where he was. I don't know where you guys are at in your journey. Maybe this invitation to show up is so exciting, and you can't wait to see how God wants to use you. Or maybe you're showing up, knees shaking in awe, and you're terrified at the thought of having to show up in the face of fear and doubt. Either way, if you take God up on this invitation, even if it's in the tiniest ways, he's going to meet you where you're at. I'm so confident of that. He's going to make you confident when your fear feels crippling, bring you bravery in the face of a ton of doubt, bring you the community you need just as much as they need you, give you the courage to show up even after falling flat on your face, and to show up as you are, not some masked version of yourself. And when you start to notice these opportunities where you can either shrink back into your comfortable lives or to show up in the name of being a ripple of change, others are going to start to notice. You're going to give someone else the courage they need to trust that they too have gifts, and their voice matters so much. So Moses, he showed up terrified, but he did it anyways. He helped bring new life into a nation that had been oppressed and told again and again that their only option was to shrink back. It wasn't easy, but Moses, he chose to keep showing up. First in this moment with a divine talking bush, and again as he led the Israelite people to the promised land. Now, if I can be vulnerable with you guys for a second, this feels a little ironic that I'm here talking to you about this, because when I first got the call to come speak here at Boost, I just got done reading this story. Oh, yes, well done. I had just got done reading this story, and yet my knee-jerk reaction was still to ask, who, me? Who am I to speak? I've never done that before. Please send someone else. To the point that I started naming people to Brad of who I thought they should have instead of me. I was totally panicked and scrambling, trying to think up an excuse why I should shrink back instead of showing up for what God was calling me to do. Sound familiar? You and I, we're in good company. So promise me, no matter what season you're in now and where you continue to find yourself as the years go on, keep showing up. Fight the temptation to shrink back when things get scary or hard. There may even be voices that tell you that you can't use your gifts or you shouldn't, that you're too much or not enough. But I'm here to remind you that the world needs you. We need your voice and we need your gifts because they've been given to you on purpose by God. Because he created each of you to be a change maker in your communities and in the world. So please, keep showing up. Keep showing up.